We were like looking at it and it come down on top of us.
Why do pterodactyls attack people? Don't go fishing at the wrong place at the wrong time. Ropen pterodactyl in Texas. Sighting number 1. Quote, my girlfriend and I just seen what I guess is called a ropen. It was huge. Wingspan, I believe, covered both lanes. Unquote. That pterosaur sighting was while the couple drove towards Wichita Falls, Texas. Danny Rodriguez was sitting outside his house in Jupiter, Florida with a friend at about 2:30 in the morning when something flew over their heads. They watched it pass over Danny's house towards the backyard. Danny later reported details to a cryptozoologist. Quote, it was a beige-brownish color with pointed wingtips, no feathers, pointed beak, and what made me think pterosaur was that long pointed thing protruding from the back of its head. New pterodactyl sighting reports from comments on videos. Pterodactyl sighting in Washington State. Quote, I saw one just like the pictures you have shown in the video. It was flying over the water from Vashon Island to Point Defiance. My husband saw it too. I wanted to tell someone, but my husband told me not to report it because he was worried it would make me subject to ridicule. I told him it was dangerous and we had a responsibility. He said no one would believe us, so they would do nothing. I kept quiet, following his advice. Let me tell you, it was not really cool to see it. It was very big and close to us. If it wanted to, it could have killed my family. I wasn't scared at the time because it was flying, but when we heard it land in the brush beside us, down a ways on the bank, then my husband snapped out of his daze and told me to get the kids in the car. I realized we could be in danger. We were both mesmerized because we had been taught they were extinct and we had never seen a creature like it. We were both studying it silently in awe till it landed. The edges were so distinct, not like feathered edges are with blurred edges, but smooth and a thin membrane stretched like a kite over the feet and body, the arms controlling the cape. Newspaper articles about living pterosaurs. Well, this is just a brief introduction. Over the years, occasionally a skeptic will say, well, why are there no newspaper articles if there really are modern pterodactyls? We live in a culture in Western countries in which it's just assumed that pterosaurs have been extinct for a long time. Pterosaurs are thought of like flying dinosaurs. The vast majority of the species of pterosaurs that lived in the past are indeed extinct. In other words, when I report living pterosaurs, I'm referring to a very narrow range of characteristics that eyewitnesses send me. Put yourself in the position of a newspaper reporter that he or she wants to just get the article published. Well, you can't just go out and say, yeah, this is apparently there are really live pterodactyls in our community flying overhead at night. They have to approach the situation from the point of view of the average reader. The average reader will be assuming that these animals are extinct and that any report of living ones must be mistaken. So generally, a newspaper, will, especially the larger papers in the United States, will just report what a person believes they saw, or will report my research on it and eyewitnesses. For example, in North Carolina, just a year ago, there was a newspaper there, one of the largest in the state of North Carolina, that published an article about my research and about eyewitnesses of apparent living pterosaurs in Raleigh, North Carolina. This was done not with a positive attitude like, oh, maybe it's real, maybe they're really pterodactyls, but from a very skeptical point of view, and this is normal for large newspapers. Let's go to another newspaper, the Press Telegram, late in the year 2004. They printed my story of my expedition that happened just a few weeks earlier in 2004, and they used my own words. They just printed what I gave them. It was not in the normal part of the newspaper. It was in the travel section, and I was relating what had happened to me when I traveled to Papua New Guinea and explored an Umbo Island.
Did it have a tail?
Yeah.
Had a tail, okay.
Feathers.
No comparison? Okay. So
No feathers.
no feathers?
Yeah,
Okay.
just skin.
And so that not all newspapers are always negative about living pterosaurs. You have to see the perspective of how things are done. Another newspaper, let me get the details on this. This was very positive, or at least it was very objective, so that the newspaper article did not take a stand saying, oh, this must be true, or it can't possibly be true. Basically, you're just publishing what I gave to them, so it's understood, of course. This is the opinion of Jonathan Whitcomb. You should know about this one. In the Los Angeles Herald of August 5th, 1891, now listen to this. This is, here's the title. Pterodactyls sports gunning for dragons near Fresno. Subtitles. Monstrosities which are half alligators, half birds. Wild, weird story of a Fresno newspaperman. Two screaming dragons snap their jaws and show their teeth. 6 feet long and look like frogs. I think I better mention something about this. Offhand, we think, well, they're dragons looking like frogs. It's just all nonsense. However, there are many details in this particular article from 1891 that suggest that maybe that's not such a fantastic story. For example, scientists for many years have known that there's a particular posture that a pterosaur would take, at least the ones that lived a long time ago. When they would be at rest, the wings would fold up a certain way, and that wing shape, the way that it went out and the kind of bumps on the side, could very well appear to be like frogs, the way that the wings went, sort of resembling that kind of a shape. Why does this line on the ground lead too close to the end of the beak of this thing? And why was that little sapling tree broken down just above ground level? Both questions are answered together, and we'll get to that soon. But when might this photo have been recorded, and why does this man have a left-handed pistol holster? Those two things relate to the answer to this. Why do these apparent common American soldiers have rectangular belt buckles? We will get to all of the answers, beginning with the unfortunate sapling. One of the men probably broke it down quickly by stepping on it to make way for the others to carry that apparent pterodactyl in this direction. Why believe that it was dragged in this direction? It looks like the beak may have been dragged as they moved the creature. Why does the line in the soil not lead exactly to the end of the beak? After the animal was set down, the head may have been turned for a better angle for the camera. Notice that this is close to an ideal angle of the head for a photograph. Even the muscle structure of the neck is visible. Now, why is it much more likely that this photo is from about 1870 rather than 1864 or 1890? If this was recorded in 1890, they would not likely need a prop like this to brace the beak so that it would not move. If it was in 1864 during the American Civil War, these apparent common Union soldiers would not have rectangular belt buckles. Also, not every soldier would have a pistol holster. Not at all. Pistols were for short range, not for typical battle combat. In other words, it appears that these men were photographed after the American Civil War. At that time, about 1 in every 6 Americans, roughly, was left-handed. This man has a left-handed pistol holster, while the other 5 men have standard ones. Is it possible that the apparent pterosaur is a fake, and that those men are only Civil War reenactors? Could the men have been photographed in the late 20th century, for example? For common Union soldiers, other than officers, oval belt buckles were standard. Civil War reenactors have usually followed suit. They have mostly oval belt buckles when they represent non-officer Union soldiers. So these men were not photographed during the Civil War, and they are not Civil War reenactors. Could they be TV actors who were given costumes that suggested that war, but somebody messed up on the belt buckles and pistols? These men have some similarity in body build. More telling is the facial hair. Unlike many common Union soldiers before the end of the war, it looks more like late 1800s beard styles. Sighting number 1, quote, I've seen one in Durham, North Carolina, off Roxbury Road early in the morning, flying over the road in front of me. It was unmistakable and was huge, bigger than the local herons and other kinds of birds. It was a dark color, not black though. The tail was long. It wasn't like the feet of a heron that hangs from the back. This tail was very long with a diamond at the end. This was about a year ago before the pandemic, unquote. Sighting number 2. The 2 eyewitnesses were at a cemetery at night near the Duke University Hospital and the Durham Freeway. The clouds that night reflected the city lights, allowing those 2 persons to see the flying creature's silhouette. It glided from the direction of the freeway. It seemed to be a fast glide, about 50 to 70 feet above the ground, and had a wingspan estimated between 17 and 23 feet. It later appeared again, flying in the opposite direction. The man who reported the sighting to me, Jonathan Whitcomb, came to the conclusion that they had witnessed a pterosaur because of the wing shape. He told me that the wings were triangular, unlike any large bird. The other eyewitness later saw it again, years later, in a nearby part of Durham. Sighting number 3. Dane Simmons was driving in the Durham area just before dusk one day in 1993. Through his open sunroof, he saw a flying creature with huge bat-like wings. He estimated the wingspan 10 to 15 feet. In December of 2017, Dane contacted me by email. Here's part of what he told me. Quote, My sighting has haunted me ever since. I know what I saw. Most of my friends laughed at me, unquote. Pterosaur sighting in New Mexico. Ropen seen by 3 men. For the original video, see the link in the description. In eastern New Mexico, while driving on a highway, the 3 men saw a pterosaur fly right in front of their car, maybe less than 200 feet away. 2 of the eyewitnesses, Parsons and Kenzie, testified on a video on the YouTube channel Modern Explorer. Jason Kenzie said, quote, I know it wasn't a stork. I know storks. I know the great blue heron. It looked like a giant bat. That leather look, the little hands on the wings, unquote. Those 2 eyewitnesses also said that the tail was long and at the end of the tail was a, quote, spade shape, unquote. Remember, subscribe. Do modern pterosaurs ever attack humans? For most of those flying creatures, never. But beware of the large exceptional ones, those rare pterodactyls that might, on occasion, attack someone somewhere on the planet. This is a memorial for a fisherman who died many years ago on a small island in northern Papua New Guinea. I never met the man. As I understand, he died many years before I was on Umboy Island and many miles to the north. Yet the tragedy of his death may help us come to some kind of understanding that may help us each do something to make this world a better place. Over the past 17 years, I've received hundreds of reports directly from the eyewitnesses themselves, persons who have encountered apparent non-extinct pterosaurs. Only about 1% of those accounts included any indication that would even hint at the possibility that a dinosaur bird or anything like a primitive flying creature was in a mood to harm a human. Stay with me to near the end of this video to get details on a terrifying encounter a teenage girl had with a huge flying creature at night in Virginia. For now, we focus on Papua New Guinea in the Southwest Pacific, where I led a Ropen expedition in 2004. About 150 miles north of Umboy Island is Manus Island. In this area, the natives call the Ropen core. In 2010, I received a few emails from a native who was born on Manus. I now quote parts of his emails. Quote, "This is the story from the grandson of the man who killed the creature." Unquote. As a side note, the native man who killed a core eventually died from the injuries he received from the animal. The native apparently was defending himself from continuous attack from the flying creature. Now back to the story. Quote, "It has been endemic to the southeast Rapatona electorate until the early 1940s, where they declined in numbers. It was so bad that fishing at night stopped for years." Unquote. I have no independent verification for that, but apparently the natives in this area stopped fishing at night because of the danger from those flying creatures. Now back to emails. Quote, "The creatures described as having skin all over it. The oldies reckoned the core, as it is called by them, fished by skimming slowly around on the ocean's surface. Large ones have been seen to take turtles, dolphin, and even young crocodiles." Unquote. Now we get to the attack on the native fisherman. Quote, "This story is from the early 60s, the last death reported by this creature. The native of Tandul village, Pack Island, went fishing and was attacked. The animal destroyed his canoe and he fought it with a traditional fishing spear. Every time the animal attacked, he dived under, and when the light above him showed the animal, he would lunge up, doing only slight damage. It followed him to shore, where a sea cave runs into a crevice which leads into the middle of the island. Badly wounded and backing into this barret, he wedged the spear into a crevice and took the animal through the mouth with the spear. He crawled out, was found by villagers who went to see the animal and told his story. He died 3 days later. Now there are only a few very shy. They have a suspected area. They live in the middle of large volcanic islands in caves. The natives declare it taboo and is never visited." Unquote. Now, this is no joke. Where did this sketch come from? It was drawn by an eyewitness. About 3 years before this photo was taken, this little girl, Patty Carson, saw the flying creature in eastern Cuba in about the year 1965. I'm Jonathan Whitcomb. Yesterday, March 13th, 2019, I learned that my friend Patty Carson had passed away. She was never on a radio or television talk show, to my knowledge. Comparatively few people knew about her shocking encounter with what appears to have been a non-extinct long-tailed pterosaur at Guantanamo Bay. Now, look at what happened 6 years later in 1971, another sighting of a strange flying creature at Guantanamo Bay. A U.S. Marine was taking a break one day when he saw 2 of them. Please consider his own words, quote, "very close in range from where I was standing so that I had a perfectly clear view of them." Within minutes of his sighting, he drew this, quote, "they had a long tail trailing behind with a tuft of hair at the end. The wingspan roughly 10 feet, could have been 8 feet or 12 feet. I've interviewed Eskin by phone several times over a period of years. He's a real person and stands by his testimony of what he saw in 1971. He also said, "There is no mistaking what I saw. It was middle of the day during our free time, a work day. No booze, no drugs, bright sun, and full visibility." I've spoken with both of these eyewitnesses many times, and both of them convinced me that they were telling the truth. I submit these 2 sketches as evidence in cryptozoology for the existence of these flying creatures that have been seen by many other eyewitnesses in North America and in other areas of the world. Let's now compare these 2 drawings with open-mindedness. I see a difference in the depiction of the head crest. Look at it this way. What artist has a perfect memory? Why should 2 sketches be identical? These are not 2 photos of the same animal, but sketches from memory, maybe not even the same animal. I measured the distance from the center of the eye to the end of the head crest and to the end of the beak or mouth. In Eskin Kun's sketch, the eye is a bit closer to the end of the beak. In Patty's sketch, the center of the eye is about halfway between the end of the head crest and the end of the beak. I submit that this slight difference is well within the range of error that we can expect from 2 gifted artists who have depicted from memory what they remembered of a real encounter with a real animal. The sketch drawn by Patty Carson shows many small teeth. Why does the sketch by Eskin Kun show no teeth? The 2 flying creatures seen in 1971 were flying apparently with their mouths closed. Most of Patty's observation of the apparent pterosaur in 1965 was in those seconds while it was standing in tall grass. In addition, Patty seems to have been closer to the animal than Mr. Kun was to the 2 that he saw flying. In the earlier sighting, after the creature flew away, Patty ran home to tell her family that she had seen a dinosaur. Consider her own words on what then happened. "They all pooh-poohed me and started to tell me it was a pelican or frigate bird. No way! It was as tall as a man when it stood up on his haunches. It was close. It froze for a few seconds, so I got a good look. When we were kids, we lived in Arlington. Dad worked in the Pentagon, and we would often go to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, and when I saw it, I knew exactly that it was a pterodactyl, and even named it as such to my family. They didn't believe me. I know what I saw. I know exactly what I saw." Wait. Hold on. Stop. You probably need some background on this. Where is it coming from and where is it going? I think you now get it that 2 persons have been convinced that they saw a pterodactyl, or 2, at Guantanamo Bay in the middle of the 20th century. But those creatures are also called, by some people, flying dinosaurs, and we've been told all our lives that dinosaurs all became extinct many millions of years ago. In the year 2003, I was an independent forensic videographer, working for attorney firms, mostly in Southern California. A man from Texas sent me videos he had recorded of natives in Papua New Guinea who had seen large flying creatures. Those men and women may have seen something like a pterosaur, apparently, in those tropical islands of the southwest Pacific. Papua New Guinea has some of the most remote and unexplored jungles in the world. In 2003, I assumed that this would be a likely place for pterosaurs to live, if they have survived anywhere on the earth. In other words, maybe in a remote jungle, but no other place in the world. Keep in mind that this was long before I knew about the sightings in Cuba by Patty Carson and Eskin Kun. By early in 2004, I had heard about 3 Americans who wanted to search for living pterosaurs in Papua New Guinea. They were planning for an expedition in 2004, and I soon determined that I wanted to be a member of the team. To make this a brief explanation, I did go on an expedition in Papua New Guinea later in 2004, but I was the lone American. 2 of the others, David Wetzel and Garth Guessman, went on a separate expedition a few weeks after I had explored part of Umboy Island. Yet those 2 expeditions on Umboy Island were not such a fool's errand as people in Western countries would suppose. We were not depending only on what a few natives had said about the Ropen of Umboy, also called Duus by other natives. A bit earlier in 2004, I had communicated with 3 other eyewitnesses, 2 Australians and 1 American. Consider now the testimonies of the 2 Australians. But first, let's take a brief look into the diversity to be found in Australia, including geography. Then we'll dive into a sighting report from Perth. This is what I used to think about Australia, the arid outback. Yet this continent has much more than desert environments. This continent has a variety of habitats. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that one species of pterosaur had survived into modern times. Also, let us suppose that the animal became uncommon and came out only at night, mostly. If this species of pterosaur continued to grow throughout life, only a few of them would become very large. That means the really big ones would be rare, perhaps very rare. That means people would almost never see the biggest ones, since the species was nocturnal. But when a person did see a big one, how would that person report the encounter? Who would believe such a thing? I suggest that under those conditions, few eyewitnesses would report an encounter with what looked like a gigantic dragon. I'll get to the point. This is more than just theoretical. Before my expedition in Papua New Guinea, which was in September and October of 2004, I started an email correspondence with a lady in Australia. She and her husband decided to be anonymous, so I'll call them Mary and John. Here's part of what she told me. Whatever people may think, the fact remains that my husband and I both saw that creature. My husband, being a scientist, took in things from the sighting that I was far too amazed, stunned, to take in. We have speculated much on what it was that we saw and still do not come up with answers, but we do know that it was definitely a living creature, 100% alive, and I would swear that before God himself. It was very big. We would not have been able to see what it was if the ground lighting had not lit its underside. We could clearly see it coming and stood rooted to the spot watching it as it drew closer. As it came to a point to the right of us and above, the ground lighting lit it up, and that was a stunning moment for the both of us. I was so totally shocked, amazed, awed, and bewildered at the same time. This was completely out of the reality I had grown up to know. And I can tell you in all honesty, it has changed me. I never believed these things existed until that night. The following is part of what the husband told me. We had been walking in the evening and had just crested a hill and were on the downslope along a major thoroughfare. In the distance, I perceived an object in the sky. At this point, it was rather indistinct, and wondering what it might be, I watched it as it approached. Soon I was able to determine that it was some sort of flying creature, and my first thought was that it must be some very large bird. Its progress had brought it closer, and while its shape did resemble a bird, I thought it must be the largest bird I had ever witnessed. It had reached our position and was about 250 or 300 feet above us and slightly inland. The area was moderately well lit, and I saw that it seemed to be a light reddish tan color. It did not appear to be covered with feathers, but had a leathery texture. Soon after it passed us, it flew over a more brightly lit sports area, which highlighted even more the leathery appearance, also bringing more detail to view. The wings were the most definite leathery feature. They were shaped in a triangular arch, similar to a very elongated shark fin. The body also still appeared leathery, though textured, as though possibly covered with fine hair or small scales, the distance preventing any finer observation other than that it was a slightly different texture than the wings. I estimated the size to be in excess of 30 foot, possibly as great as 50 foot. Those are the words of a scientist, a man who did not mention any words like flying dinosaur or pterodactyl or pterosaur, but whose description of this flying creature makes it obvious to me that it was no bird or bat known to science. Now let's very briefly consider the sighting by Dwayne Hodgkinson in 1944, an encounter that he and his army buddy had north of Australia, near the town of Finchhaven, New Guinea. That animal, when they first glanced over to the other side of the jungle clearing, they had first assumed was a bird, for it flapped its wings as it ran to get up off the ground. But it took only a couple of seconds or so for the truth to become obvious. It was no bird, for it was the size of a small airplane, and it had a long horn-like head crest and a tail that Hodgkinson estimated was at least 10 or 15 feet long. The testimonies of the Perth couple and of Dwayne Hodgkinson strengthened my resolve to search diligently for the Ropen of Umboy Island. To be brief, I was able to interview several important eyewitnesses, and the other two American explorers also interviewed important eyewitnesses of the Ropen. We three explorers never got any good daylight view of that flying creature, but we returned to the United States convinced that not all pterosaurs are extinct. Over the years since 2004, I've written a scientific paper for a peer-reviewed journal, a number of books, and countless web pages and blog posts on sightings of these wonderful non-extinct flying creatures.